The Bordeaux almost slipped, and with it, the fragile mask of silence she wore every night. A single sneer cut through the glittering hum of chandeliers and clinking glasses, sharp, deliberate, meant to remind her she was invisible. But in that instant, beneath the crystal rain and the scent of truffle oil, something shifted. This was not the night to underestimate Hoa Karen. The restaurant was a stage, and everyone knew their part. Velvet curtains framed the room, chandeliers sparkled like constellations, and laughter spilled like expensive champagne. The wealthy did not simply dine here, they performed. Waiters scurried in polished shoes, carrying silver trays as though their hands were invisible threads, holding the theater together. And at the edge of this opulent play stood Hoa Karen, 26, in a wrinkled black uniform, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. No lipstick, no jewelry. Her beauty was the kind that whispered rather than shouted, overlooked by those who only valued noise. At the VIP table, Richard Vance whirled his glass with the arrogance of a man who owned half the skyline. His gray hair gleamed under the chandelier, his gold Rolex catching the light with every flick of his wrist. He didn't look at Karen so much as through her, like she was a smudge on the glass he raised. Beside him, Candace, his wife, gleamed in a red dress that clung like a weapon, her laughter sharp enough to slice the air. Across sat Derek, a tanned crypto evangelist, and Lauren, his diamond-draped companion who wore new money like perfume. Together they formed a chorus of mockery, every remark dipped in venom and polished with privilege. "You missed a spot," Richard sneered, pointing to an imaginary smear on his wine glass. The table erupted. Karen's hand brushed the bottle's neck, steady, deliberate. "I'll get you a new glass," she replied, her voice calm as stone. She set the glass down with a soft clink, turned, and walked away, her steps measured, her shoulders unbowed. They thought silence meant weakness. They didn't know silence was her weapon. Behind the bar, the bartender caught her eye as she slipped a photo back into her apron pocket. A faded image, a younger Karen in desert fatigues, soldiers at her side, dust rising behind them like smoke. "Family?" he asked. She shook her head. "Something like that." He didn't press, because Karen was not the kind of woman you pressed. Around her, the theater of wealth continued, champagne bubbles, candlelit smirks, knives slicing through rare steak. But beneath the glitter, the air felt weighted, charged, like the city itself was holding its breath. Karen moved like a shadow through it all, carrying trays that never rattled, eyes that missed nothing. And as Richard Vance lifted his glass again, smug under crystal light, he could not know that before the night was over, the invisible waitress he mocked would become the only name that mattered. The laughter from the VIP table spread like a stain, louder than the soft jazz drifting through the speakers. It wasn't joy, it was performance, sharpened by cruelty. Hoa Karen passed their table again, her tray balanced, her face unreadable. The sting of their words had already settled into the air. Invisible, but heavy, like smoke curling from an unseen fire. Richard Vance leaned back, one arm draped lazily over his chair. His voice carried as if he wanted the entire room to hear. "This place has standards," he said, eyes flicking toward Karen's scuffed black flats. "Shame they don't extend to the staff." Candace giggled, the sound brittle, rehearsed. Derek chimed in with a half-slurred joke about charity cases in uniform, and Lauren whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to catch. "She's never even been anywhere like this, except maybe to clean it." The table erupted once more. Karen didn't flinch. She placed their wine down with a precision that betrayed no tremor, then walked on, her eyes sliding across the room, catching details the others missed. The way a man at the far end fidgeted too often with his watch. The glances exchanged by strangers near the door. She noticed everything, but she let nothing show. At the bar, Greg, the manager, intercepted her with his usual sheen of sweat and nervous energy. He leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. "Stay clear of Colton," he hissed, jerking his chin toward the corner booth. "He doesn't need you tripping over him." Karen followed the gesture. James Colton sat alone, mid-30s, lean, dark-haired, his suit understated yet cut with the kind of precision only old money afforded. His phone was in his hand, his eyes down, but even from across the room, his presence was magnetic. He didn't demand attention, but people noticed him anyway. Karen's gaze held his for half a second. He didn't smile. Neither did she. Then she nodded and moved on. Greg's whisper clung like a warning, but it was unnecessary. Karen never argued, never explained. She simply worked, silent and deliberate, her every step disciplined. Later, by the bar again, Jenna, the hostess, intercepted her with a smirk. "You know, Karen," she drawled, twirling a strand of her blonde hair, "you should smile more. You're bringing down the vibe. Nobody wants a gloomy waitress serving their $500 dinners." A few guests turned their heads, waiting for a reaction. Karen set a pitcher down, movement slow, controlled. "I'm here to work, not perform," she said evenly. Jenna's smirk widened, undeterred. "Maybe if you tried harder, you wouldn't look like you just rolled out of a shelter." A couple at a nearby table chuckled. Karen's hand paused on the pitcher, her knuckles whitening for a fleeting moment. Then she walked away, silent. The room carried on crystal, laughter, arrogance. But beneath the glittering calm, something darker pulsed. Karen felt it before anyone else. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the shadows were already here. The doors burst open with a crack like thunder. 3 men in black ski masks stormed inside, boots hammering against polished marble. Guns gleamed under the chandelier light as voices erupted into chaos. "Everybody down," the leader roared, his voice coarse, like gravel dragged across steel. Glasses shattered, forks clattered against plates. Women screamed, silk dresses tangling as they dropped to the floor. Men in tailored suits dove beneath tables, clutching Rolexes and diamond cuffs as if jewelry could shield them from bullets. The illusion of elegance crumbled in seconds, leaving only raw fear. At the VIP table, Richard Vance yanked Candace down, his Rolex tearing at the tablecloth. Candace cried out, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Derek was already on his knees, hands raised, muttering, "Take it, take whatever you want." Lauren sobbed, mascara streaking her cheeks, her diamond earrings glinting like bait in the dim light. But in the middle of the storm, Hoa Karen stood still. Tray of empty glasses balanced in her hand, her breath calm, her eyes sharp. She didn't scream. She didn't drop the tray. She counted 1, 2, 3, every detail mapped in her mind. The angle of the leader's gun, the twitch of the second man's hands, the knife strapped at the third man's ankle. "On the floor!" The leader barked, storming toward her, weapon raised. His boots screeched against the marble, the barrel of his gun closing the space between them until it was inches from her forehead. "Why isn't she moving?" A woman hissed from under her table. Her pearls clutched so tight they cut into her skin. "She's going to ruin this for all of us." Her husband whispered back, eyes wide with terror. "She's nobody. She'll get us shot." The words spread like poison. Richard snarled from his crouch. "Don't be stupid. He'll kill you." Candace's voice was shrill, desperate. "You're going to get us all killed." Derek's muttering turned vicious. "Don't drag us down, idiot." Lauren whimpered. "She's nothing. Why is she acting like she's something?" Every eye turned on her, blaming her for standing tall. Fear made them crueler than ever. They didn't see her courage. They saw defiance that threatened their fragile safety. The leader pressed the gun harder against her forehead. "Kneel. Now." Karen exhaled slowly, the sound deliberate, controlled. Then, in a single motion, she shifted her weight just enough. The tray clattered softly onto the table beside her. Her hand shot up, twisting his wrist with bone-snapping precision. The gun hit the floor with a metallic scream. Her elbow slammed into his jaw. His body folded and crashed like dead weight. The room froze. Gasps rippled across the hall. The second robber blinked in disbelief, then screamed, "You think you're a hero, bitch?" His gun wavered, panic spilling through his movements. He lunged. Karen ducked low, her body flowing like water. She spun, drove her foot into his stomach. He flew backward, smashing through a glass table, the explosion of shards echoing like gunfire. Guests shrieked, crawling away from the wreckage, their fear now tangled with outrage. "She's insane," Candace screeched from behind an overturned chair. "She's going to kill us all." Greg, the manager, his face flushed with terror, shouted from near the bar. "Stand down, Karen! Let the police handle this!" But she didn't hear them. Or maybe she did and simply chose not to listen. Her focus was locked on the third robber, the one who hadn't moved yet. He drew a knife, the blade catching the light in a glint of steel. His steps were slow, deliberate. Unlike the others, he wasn't panicked. His voice came low and certain. "You're dead." The room held its breath. Karen shifted her stance, her eyes steady, her body calm. She'd done this before. Too many times. The battlefield might have been gone, but her instincts had never left. The storm had finally broken. The knife flashed toward her side, sharp under the chandelier light. Hoa Karen pivoted, her body moving with a precision that was almost unnatural. She caught the robber's wrist, twisted hard until the blade slipped from his grasp, and in the same breath, flipped him over her shoulder. His skull cracked against the marble floor with a dull, final thud. The blade clattered uselessly beside him. Silence followed, a silence so sharp it hummed in the ears. 3 men down, broken, disarmed, and Karen stood over them, her breath calm, her stance loose but ready. To her, it had been instinct. To everyone else, it was unthinkable. A man in a tuxedo, his face blotched red from fear, whispered harshly, "She's dangerous. You saw how she moved." His date clutched her diamond bracelet, eyes wild. "She's not normal." Maybe she was one of them. The whispers swelled, building like a tide. People weren't relieved. They were terrified. Instead of seeing salvation, they saw something alien, a woman who refused to break, a waitress who had no right to stand above them. "She's reckless," Candace spat, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "This isn't bravery. This is insanity." Greg, the manager, stumbled forward, face slick with sweat. "What the hell was that, Karen? What have you been hiding?" His tone was accusing, as if her strength was betrayal. Karen bent down slowly, carefully setting the knife on the nearest table. Her movements were deliberate, measured, proof that she was no threat. Yet her eyes met the man in the tuxedo who had called her dangerous. For a single second, her gaze held his calm, unwavering, and he shrank back, his bravado collapsing into silence. A young waiter, Tony, crawled from beneath a table, his hands trembling. "Karen, stop," he whispered hoarsely. "You'll make it worse." His wide eyes pleaded. "You're not a cop." Karen said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than any reply. For a moment, the scene fractured in her mind. She was back in the dust of another country, 20 years old, rifle slung across her back. Children ran barefoot in the streets, shouting for candy, their laughter ringing even as gunfire echoed in the distance. She remembered tossing a sweet to a boy, his gap-toothed grin a brief spark of light before her sergeant barked her back to focus. That memory, buried deep, flickered through her like a ghost before vanishing. Now, in this glittering fortress of wealth, she stood the same calm, resolute, carrying the weight of choices no one else understood. The guests did not cheer, they did not thank her. They stared, eyes full of judgment, fear, and envy. In their world, she had stepped out of line. Heroes weren't supposed to look like her. Heroes weren't supposed to wear aprons and carry trays. But it was too late. The truth was already written across the floor, in shattered glass and fallen men. In 15 seconds, Hoa Karen had changed everything. Sirens wailed in the distance, their echo weaving through the fractured silence. Within minutes, the heavy boots of NYPD officers thundered across the marble floor. Radios crackled, commands barked, and the 3 robbers were hauled up in cuffs, groaning as they were dragged away. The danger was gone, but the tension lingered, coiling tighter with every whisper. Karen stood quietly near the bar, her apron still dusted with shards of glass. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. But the room around her seethed with unease. Relief should have flooded the air. Instead, suspicion spread like a contagion. "She's dangerous," muttered a silver-haired man, his suit wrinkled from crawling on the floor. He jabbed a finger toward her. "You saw how she moved. That wasn't normal." His wife clutched her pearls, eyes darting between Karen and the police. She could have been working with them. "How else do you explain it?" A murmur rose, overlapping voices fusing into one accusation. "She's not one of us." Greg, The manager approached, his forehead slick with sweat, eyes burning with fury rather than gratitude. "What the hell was that?" he snapped, his voice loud enough to carry. "What have you been hiding, Karen? You think this is some kind of vigilante show? You could have gotten us all killed." Candace, fixing her wine-stained dress, seized the moment to sharpen her venom. "I knew she was trouble the second I saw her," she hissed. "People like her always bring chaos." Karen didn't reply. She gathered empty glasses from a table, her movements calm, deliberate, as though the world hadn't just turned upside down. Silence was her answer, and that silence only enraged them more. Then one of the officers froze, his eyes narrowing as they landed on her. He was older, scars slashed across his cheek, his presence commanding. Lowering his radio, he took a cautious step forward. "My God," he breathed. "Sergeant Hokaran, I thought you retired." The room fell still. Every head turned. Karen inclined her head slightly, her voice, low but clear, carried across the hush. "I just wanted a normal life." Recognition spread across the officer's face, and then something softer: respect. "Navy Special Forces, counterterrorism. You trained with my unit back in Kabul," he said. "You saved my ass once. I'll never forget it." The silence deepened, charged now with something heavier than fear. Richard's face tightened. Candace's eyes widened. Derek looked away, ashamed. The story they had built about Karen, the nobody waitress, the outsider, fractured in a single moment. Yet the room did not shift toward gratitude. Instead, their egos bristled. To admit she had saved them meant confessing they had been wrong. And people like them never did that. "She's still nobody," Richard muttered under his breath, but loud enough for others to hear. "Doesn't change a damn thing." Karen heard it all. She always did, but her face remained unreadable, her hands steady as she stacked the glasses. The storm wasn't over, it had only changed shape. For a long moment, the restaurant seemed frozen in glass, the glittering chandeliers, the spilled wine, the scattered whispers. Then a chair scraped softly against the marble. James Colton, silent until now, rose from his corner table. He walked with the calm of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to command attention. The guests parted instinctively, their eyes flicking between him and Karen. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud rolling over a horizon. Dark and inevitable. He stopped in front of her. Karen still held a stack of plates, her posture steady, her silence unbroken. Colton studied her for a beat, then spoke, his voice low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I don't see a waitress," he said. "I see the only person here who kept her nerve." A ripple went through the crowd. Candace's glass slipped from her trembling hand, shattering against the floor. Richard's jaw clenched, fury twisting his face. Derek lowered his eyes, shame pulling his shoulders inward. Lauren fidgeted with her diamond earrings, her earlier laughter gone. Colton extended his hand. "From today," he continued, his tone sharper now, meant for everyone listening, "I appoint her head of security for my corporation." The room gasped. Conversations broke out in frantic murmurs, disbelief spreading faster than the earlier fear. To elevate a waitress, the woman they had mocked, dismissed, condemned into power, in front of them all, was a humiliation they couldn't mask. For a second, Karen only looked at his hand. Then her eyes lifted, steady and searching, meeting his without wavering. She set the plates gently onto the bar, wiped her palms on her apron, and shook his hand firm, deliberate, unyielding. At the far end, a young busboy who had hidden behind the bar stepped forward, his face pale, but his voice trembling with courage. "I saw what you did," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You saved us, all of us." Silence followed, not mocking this time, but uneasy, ashamed. Karen's gaze softened slightly, just for him. "Just doing my job," she said, and in that moment, the balance of the room shifted. By morning, the city had already turned her silence into a roar. Headlines blazed across every screen. "Billionaire appoints waitress as head of security after foiling armed robbery." Clips from Lysio's security cameras leaked online, replayed in slow motion, Hoa Karen moving with unshakable calm while chaos reigned around her. The footage was mesmerizing, glasses shattering, guests screaming, and in the center of it all, her face still, her hands precise, her body cutting through fear like a blade. Comments flooded the feeds. Some hailed her a hero, others spun conspiracy theories. No normal person fights like that. She saved those people, and they still hated her. Remember the Bordeaux guy? Look at his smug face. Screenshots spread faster than truth ever could. Richard Vance's sneer became a meme overnight. The caption mocked the woman who saved his life. His hedge fund took an immediate hit as clients pulled out, disgusted by the arrogance that now defined him. Richard tried to issue a statement, but every word reeked of panic. The markets had already judged him. Candace didn't fare better. Her sharp dollar store insult, captured on a guest's shaky phone camera, went viral with brutal speed. Sponsors withdrew from her upcoming gala. Socialite friends left her messages unread. She became the face of venomous privilege, her perfect smile dissected frame by frame. Derek's crypto startup imploded under the weight of a single viral tweet. Crypto Bro mocked a Navy vet who saved his ass. Investors, you cool with this? Funding disappeared overnight. Lauren, once eager to flaunt every glittering accessory online, locked her Instagram after screenshots of her mocking Karen's shoes resurfaced. The influencer's sheen cracked, replaced by the glare of collective scorn. Meanwhile, Karen remained silent. She gave no interviews, posted no statements. Her power came from absence. The less she spoke, the louder the world argued in her name. Clips of her calm expression, of her refusing to flinch, spread with captions like, "Strength doesn't need noise, and silence is power." For those who had sneered, the reckoning was swift. For Karen, it was quiet. She didn't revel in their downfall. She simply went about her work, now in a different office, far above the city, a desk bare except for one small frame. The old photo of her in fatigues, dust curling in the corners. She hadn't chosen this attention, but she didn't run from it either. In boardrooms across Manhattan, executives whispered her name with caution. Some feared her, others respected her, but no one ignored her. Not anymore. The night at Liscio hadn't just changed the balance of a single room, it had shifted the weight of the city itself. And the rich, once untouchable, were now scrambling under the shadow of the woman they had tried so hard to erase. Her first day at Colton Global began without ceremony. No press conference, no flashing cameras, just a glass tower scraping the Manhattan sky, its lobby hushed with polished marble and the scent of power. Hoa Karen stepped through the revolving doors in the same steady stride she'd used carrying trays at Liscio. She wore no uniform now, only a simple black suit that seemed to fit her like armor. The elevator ride was silent, but the weight inside her chest was not nerves. It was memory. She had worn uniforms before, ones that carried medals and missions, lives and deaths. Compared to that, this was only another battlefield with different weapons. When she entered the boardroom, the air shifted. A dozen executives in tailored suits looked up from their glossy laptops, conversations halting mid-sentence. Some of them had been at Liscio that night, they remembered. Their eyes betrayed it, a flicker of shame, a sliver of fear. One man, with a slick smile she recognized, had laughed at Candace's dollar store jab. Now he rose quickly to offer her a chair, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice overly polite, "we're lucky to have you." Karen gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. She took her seat without a word. The silence that followed was not dismissal anymore. It was deference. On her new desk sat one object, the creased photo she carried from shift to shift, now framed in glass. A younger version of herself stared back from the dust of a foreign courtyard, rifle slung across her shoulder. She never explained it. She never needed to. In meetings, her presence was enough to quiet the room. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words were measured, precise. Executives leaned forward, pens poised, afraid to miss a detail. Her suggestions were not dramatic, only practical, grounded, tactical, but they carried the gravity of someone who had lived the cost of miscalculation. Outside those rooms, whispers traveled through the halls. "She's the one from the video." The waitress who wasn't, some called her a hero, others still doubted, but none dared to mock her. Not anymore. One afternoon, after a briefing, a young aide lingered. Her voice was low, nervous. "I was at Liscio," she confessed, hands twisting together. "I didn't say anything that night, but I saw how they treated you. I'm sorry. Karen looked at her, the faintest softening in her hazel eyes. It's done, she said, tone gentle but final. The aide hesitated, then handed her a small card with two handwritten words, "Thank you." Karen tucked it into her pocket beside the old photo. The gesture was small, but it rippled through her silence like a stone dropped into still water. Respect had replaced ridicule. Fear had shifted into acknowledgement. Her quiet was no longer mistaken for weakness. It had become power. Evening in Manhattan carried a different kind of hush. The rush hour horns had faded into a low hum, and the glass towers glowed like watchful sentinels against the dark. Hoa Karen left Colton Global with her step steady, her posture the same as always, deliberate, controlled, measured. Yet something in the air around her had shifted. People no longer brushed past her without seeing. Heads turned, voices lowered. On the sidewalk, a street vendor waved her down. His cart was small, stacked with trinkets and bracelets, strung with cheap wooden beads. "For you, lady," he said, his grin wide, his accent thick. He held up a simple bracelet, the kind most people would ignore. Karen froze, her hand halfway to her bag. The beads caught the glow of a street lamp, and memory struck her like a wave. She was 20 again, standing in a dusty market on the other side of the world. Children had crowded around, eyes bright, palms outstretched. She had tossed candy to a boy with a gap-toothed smile, his laughter cutting through the smoke and diesel. A sergeant's voice had pulled her back to duty, but that moment, that fleeting kindness, had stayed. Her fingers brushed the bracelet now. She handed the vendor a bill, more than enough, and slipped the beads into her pocket, right beside the folded thank you card and the framed photograph of her younger self. "Keep the change," she murmured. The man nodded gratefully, unaware of the storm of memory he had awakened. Karen turned and kept walking, her stride unbroken. The city loomed ahead, sprawling and endless. Boardrooms whispered her name. Strangers debated her silence. Videos replayed her calm face in slow motion, dissecting every blink. To the world, she was a headline, a symbol, a story to be told and retold. But to herself, she was only what she had always been: steady, unshaken, unashamed. She didn't feel like a victor. She didn't crave the title of hero. She felt only like herself, a woman who had chosen simplicity, who had been forced to reveal what lay beneath when the world demanded it. They had called her nothing. They had called her reckless, dangerous, invisible. And still, she stood, the weight of their judgment dissolving into the quiet power of her resolve. For everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told they were not enough, her story lingered like a flame in the dark. It wasn't about medals or headlines. It wasn't about the fall of the arrogant or the rise of the humble. It was about the simple truth that silence, when unbroken, can be stronger than the loudest jeer. Hoa Karen walked into the night, her pockets heavy with memory, her steps light with certainty. She was no longer the waitress they mocked. She was the shadow they couldn't erase, the presence they could never again ignore. And in that quiet victory, she carried not triumph, but truth.